Coming up, this episode is about laying a foundation of trust, confidence, honesty, and compassion. This conversation addresses points that everyone could use some help mastering because when they do, life becomes just a little bit easier and those hard conversations become a little bit more palatable. We're talking leadership, which starts with self, communication, honesty, non-judgment. That's a hard one, I know. We're human. Let's face it, that can be difficult. And we're talking about letting go of control. Perhaps equally as hard, but you know, that desire that you may have where you kind of want to fix everything and everyone so they fit into your life so that things are just a little bit easier and happy. This is a big topic, and we just scratched the surface. This episode is kind of like the appetizer. I have a feeling my guest is soon going to become a regular because there is far more to cover. We're talking under the umbrella of parenting, but whether or not you are a parent, this information will apply to you, especially if you are charged with leading others. And if you're a parent or soon to be parent, you'll want to listen in because your belief in yourself, in your potential, your confidence, and your trust all begins in childhood and from your family of origin. Listen in for some great tips you can implement right away with your children or with those you lead. Welcome to Shift or Get Off the Pot, the podcast that helps you get out of your head and into action so you can make your dreams your reality. Let's get to it. Hello, hello. I have a treat for all of you parents out there today. And even if you aren't a parent yet, if you may be pregnant or starting a family, listen in because you are going to learn quite a bit. Some of the information that I wish I knew before I was raising my own 4 kids. And you might even learn a little bit about parenting yourself because my guest today has numerous years, about 18 years in the coaching industry. And she has spent quite a few of those years really starting to develop what is conscious parenting, helping parents to really understand their children, how to speak to their children, how to get past some of the dysfunction that can happen as you're raising a child, and really empower parents to develop great relationships with their kids. She has a company called Raising Remarkable Kids, and she's here today to share information and insights with us that I promise you can really help in parenting your children and navigating all the different kind of craziness that can come along with being a parent. So welcome, Mary Kay Garrett.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I love talking about all things parenting.
Listen, as the parent of 4 children and a single parent, I became a single parent when my youngest was 4. I had to navigate quite a few different things, emotions and changes and things that were going on, and obviously dealing with, the trauma of divorce. But not everybody has to go through that. Some people just have issues that arise just from kids having their own personalities, wanting to do their own things. So I would love it if you could just kind of shed some light on, number one, what led you first into working with parents, because I know that it was partly your own journey that led you to this. And then we'll get into a little bit more about some of the common issues that you see.
Definitely. So my journey, it's all starts with my journey. And I used to be a very type A personality, and I ran my household by that. And my story is, I call it my line in the sand story, because I found myself, we were on this gorgeous beach vacation, and I'm standing in the middle of the living room raging at my kids. And in that moment, I realized that I hated the person raising my kids, and it was me, and something had to give. And I went down to the beach. I had a line in the sand moment. I stepped across the line and I made a promise that I would only treat with my kids with compassion, love, and respect. And from that moment on, I really worked on that promise to make sure that I was that parent that that really had a deeper relationship with my kids. It wasn't about controlling, and that I could let them shine and their personalities come out and their independence. I have three kids. They're now my two daughters are my younger two are 27 and 29, and my son's 32. Well, my middle daughter is a very, very spirited, you could call her personality. And she was also very demanding. And I would tell her growing up, I'm like, you've got this anger and this obstinance about her. You can either use that energy for positive or negative. You get to choose. So it was allowing her to have the emotions moving forward, as well as say, okay, how do you want to use this power that you do have within you? Do you want to be more of an empowered kid? And she's, and that's the way I was raising my kids. It's like, how do I toe the discipline line and, bring them up with confidence, and so that they had compassion and respect as they grew.
With confidence, that's so key. I love that you said that and used that word. I also think it's interesting, though, that you started this by saying I was a real type A personality, and then you're telling me about your child, your daughter, who just is fiercely independent and such. Did you see yourself in any of your children, in their personalities? Like, did you go, oh man, this is so me, I was this child?
You know what? Back then, no. I will say way back when, until I really got in it and really started my own, I've worked with a coach since then. I've had some form of guidance throughout the whole process. So I had someone there that was calling me out. And when it was, all right, Mary Kay, look in the mirror. How is this? How are you creating? How is this coming about because of your behavior? And that was such a huge key in the whole thing is, when I was asking my kids to do something, was it something I was willing to do? Something I was willing to look at, a vulnerability I was willing to step into. And it took me a long time to step out of that controlling. And that's when I really started seeing the shift, when I could be more authentic and honest and vulnerable and let my kids see me. Instead of being the whole, so much of parenting is, well, we've got to have this image for our kids. And when I started dropping that image and was just being real with them, things just really started shifting. They're like, I can trust my mom. I can go to my mom. It's a safe place to be with my mom. And so that's when the real shifts started happening.
I think that we as parents tend to believe that we have to have all the answers. It's like, oh, our kids are there and they're younger than us, so we're supposed to be kind of the teacher. We're supposed to be the ones that know everything, and they look to us for certain, ideas, guidance, rules. But at the same time, really, for most of us, the only models we have are our own parents. Granted, there are books out there, but how many of us, because I know I never really read any of the parenting books. I know there's more so now. There's more information. Right. Obviously, you have some information and coaching, and people are a little bit more open to that. But really, you looked towards your parents as kind of the model. And unless there was a problem, it's not that we started to go and look for an answer until there was a problem. Like, okay, now I got to fix this. But you really believe that we start all of this at a younger age, right? It's not, you don't wait until they're older and you have a problem. It's like, look, let's start understanding how to parent first when they're young, right?
Yeah. We don't start protecting the house when it's on fire. That's basically what it is it's what do you do to prepare for those moments? And that's when the hard work is done. When you can really look at yourself and what is, some of the behaviors that you have as one of the things that comes up so much with my clients is not listening. My kids never listen to me. I never, they won't listen to me. They don't. And I'm like, well, how often do you truly sit down and listen with your kids? Full on listening without thinking what's going to be your next thought, how you're going to respond. And just sit there and acknowledge them, validate them, and say, I hear what you're saying. Wow, tell me more. I'm really curious. Why is that going on in your life? How's that feeling? And get down in that when you're in that mode of just listening and giving up yourself to just be there for them. And it's something that parents, they're so stressed. We're always so busy. It's like, I know, don't take time for that ever.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think I know I have been guilty of this, and that I listen, but there's, again, because you're the parent, kind of like the teacher, I would sit there and think, okay, I'm hearing you, but I would want to kind of come up with a solution. Okay, let me help you fix that. And that's what you're saying is they don't want that. They just want to know that you're just there almost as a sounding board. Let me just blurt it all out.
Because, here's the thing, and this was something that was really just eye-opening. When we are the ones that are fixing the problem for them, what we're telling them is, I don't have confidence that you can fix this problem yourself. You can't do it. I have to do it for you. And where we have to be as parents is we've got to be courageous enough to let them go and say, okay, you try it. What are your suggestions? Use me as a sounding board. How can we walk through how you're going to solve this? And then instead of when they come back and it didn't go the way they wanted to, say, okay, what did you learn about that? How was that for you? How was that really tough? And supporting them, because that's the way they're going to learn to do it on their own. And it's so natural for us as moms to go fix it. Well, gosh, I don't want my kid in turmoil. I don't want my kid feeling like they can't do it. But that's their breakthrough. They get to go through that so that they can see the other side and go, wow, that's what builds confidence.
That's just it. As a mom, it is that maternal instinct. It's the nurturing, and it's saying, oh, I don't really want them to go through that pain, but you're right. They have to. It's almost like watching a child pull themselves up and try and learn how to walk. Take the first steps and then fall down. Take the first steps and fall down. We kind of help and redirect, but I think when it gets into the mental stuff, psychologically, it's a little bit harder, because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm just going to sit here and listen and try not to fix it. That's hard. I think that's hard to do, because that's just part of our maternal instinct to kind of go, okay, let me, try and help you. And obviously I'm speaking as a mom, but I'm, for dads too, it's part of the parenting thing, because you want to be able to help them. So how do you help parents kind of pull back and really just zip it, shut the mouth and just listen? Are there any kind of keys that you say, or certain steps that you say, look, I want you to do this?
What I'll do is to start them, baby steps, is I'll say, you know what, go sit down with your child for 10 minutes. And all you get to do is ask them questions about their day. No advice. That's great, support them. That's awesome. That sounds like you had a great time, or that sounds like that was really hard. And so just being there and listening to them, let them run the conversation. And though, they start doing that, a lot of the times I'll suggest that they go out somewhere, whether they go out for coffee or take their kids out to lunch or go out for a hike, where they have some time that's not going to be distracted by the rest of the family, and start doing that on a weekly basis. And when they get into those moments, the parents that I've suggested this to, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm going to do it with all my kids. We're going to set up time weekly and get away from everything so we can just be there and just be in the relationship. And sometimes it's not even about having conversation. It's just being connected.
Okay, that makes me feel good because you're reminding me of something I used to do with my kids. They had early out on Wednesdays. And so since I have 4 kids, every Wednesday I would alternate and I would pick up one child from school. I would leave work early that day and we would from 2:30 on, that was our time. And it could be we'd go play arcade games, we'd go to a movie, we'd go paddleboarding at the beach. It would be you pick. It was up to that child to pick. And you're right. Like we didn't always talk. It was sometimes just we're going to play skee ball, or whack-a-mole or whatever. But we had so much fun, and it was just that one-on-one time I had with each child. But that was around the ages. That was elementary school, so that was probably ages. I don't know, maybe from second grade on up to sixth grade, or because I had 4 about a year and a half apart. So. Maybe it was a little bit younger than that, but if I think before that, there were times when they were a little bit younger, or just like you say, they're not listening, or you ask them to do certain things. And then you say, okay, well, I've asked 15 times, what's going to happen here? My patience is running thin. And then you kind of go off the wall and you lose it. And you just go, okay, I'm going to yell. I used to say to them, your mom's about to have a breakdown. I'm going to absolutely go be as crazy and I'm going to scream. And then I would just scream and let it out. But I kind of had to go, mom has to have a timeout, but I want to know, like, there were times that I did that and plenty of times that I didn't do that. Listen, I could look back and go, oh, I wish I had learned all this ahead of time, because I think I would have kind of said to myself, stop, and just, go through these things. But for parents that we all get pushed to a limit, right? We all get to a point where we're like, oh, I'm trying everything you're saying. I'm trying to listen, but it's not working. Or I feel like either my child's closed off, or I feel like my child really just doesn't want to pay attention and doesn't care. What can we do in those moments?
So when you're getting frustrated, one of the best things to do is to walk away. I mean, we're human. We're going to have those moments. They're going to be there. How do you support that moment for yourself? Are you accountable? Do you say, you know what? That wasn't appropriate for me to act that way. I am really sorry. And so holding yourself accountable as a parent, again, there's a mirror. It's teaching them how to hold themselves accountable in those moments as well. And even with, when they're not wanting to do something, what is underneath that? What is it? What's the resistance? Did they just have a bad day at school that they're not talking about? Again, this is it's building up to these moments so that when you're in those moments, you can have these conversations and say, all right, you kind of, we talked about this. And that's another thing, is having buy-in from them. When there's a chore, it's not telling everything, always ordering your kids around. How do you get buy-in and engagement? Okay, we've got chores to do. We've got things to do. We have committed to doing these chores. You had said, after school, you would get your chores done. And what's up? Because it's not being done. So what's not working? What's the resistance? And how do we get underneath? Because we never seem to look at what's underneath the problems. Are they being bullied at school? I had one mom I was working with that had this son that just wouldn't do absolutely anything. He'd sit in front of the TV and play games, and she couldn't get him off it. And I'm like, well, what's going on in your life? What's behind all that for you? Tell me a little bit about your life. And she had a very, the family had she had a miscarriage of his new baby sister. She had gotten remarried and all of these things. And I'm like, sit down with him and have that conversation. And she called me the next day and said, he's a different child. I had no idea that these things were so heavy on him. But everything was bothering him. Everything had built up. And so he just shut down. He couldn't handle it anymore. And so he wasn't listening to anything. And so when she reconnected and say, okay, what is going on here? He's like, and she acknowledged, yeah, these were hard times for us, but we never think of it being a hard time for the kids. They just kind of get, she would just kind of brush over. Well, if this is an adult thing, no, kids have their emotions, and they get to be connected and understood. And we think of, my kid has an attitude problem or behavioral problem. Well, it's not merely taking it for face value. It's really questioning and understanding them and make them feel seen and heard. It's going to start moving them forward.
Well, because they aren't as resilient as I think we like to believe they are. Like we're always told, oh, kids are so resilient. Yes, okay, in some ways, but you're right. It can weigh so heavy on a child, anything that's going on. I remember when my mom passed and my kids were very close to my mom. And, you realize, okay, there's going to be some pain there and some sorrow, but there were things that were going on that I didn't really link initially to it. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but it was when they were able to feel like they could talk openly about that. But I think you're right. Part of that was me just being open in the family about, yeah, I really miss her, or I'm feeling this today, and not realizing, because I wasn't consciously thinking, I've got to share this. It wasn't like a textbook. I've got to share this information so my kids can understand this and process their feelings too. But it was just me, blurting out what was going on. Maybe some things I shouldn't have blurted out, but okay. But what you're talking about here is that allowing your child to process those feelings, feel those emotions, and being aware so that you're giving them a safe space to open that up. But how early can we really start doing that for our children so that it does become easier and more natural? Because if you've got a 15-year-old that's really going through it, at school, they're trying to figure out, I've got to keep my grades up. I want to try and go to college, or I've got to or maybe I got cut from the team I've been trying so hard for, or, stuff's going on at school. And, I think at some point at that age, number one, they can be a little bit embarrassed to share that with their parents or their family members, because maybe their sibling isn't having that experience. And, if you've laid, what you're saying is that groundwork has been laid early enough, then it changes the game, right? Completely.
It takes years and years before it's not something, we're so used to that immediate gratification. And this isn't immediate gratification. This is years and years of hard work to build up the confidence and that safe space for a teenager to feel, so no matter what it is, to know that your parent is not going to judge you, that they can come to you with anything, drugs, sex, alcohol, bullying, that you're going to be there and be that person to say, okay, I'm not going to solve it for you. Let's figure out what you can do. How you go through this. I see that you're feeling this way. So always being that support. And it's a very hard place to go, to not judge and not want to fix. But if you can do that with your kids, get to that space. And what happens with so many parents is they do flashbacks to, again, like we talked in the beginning, how they were parenting. Well, wow, that's not the way I want to parent my kid. That means they're going to be walking all over me. And it doesn't. Yes. You build that trust between them, and it's so powerful that you're the one they have that place rather than going to one of their friends. Part of my my tagline is be that role, be the person you want raising your kids. So how do you work? That. How do you work? How do you start when you've got young kids going, I want to be that person they come to, that they can be there for, to help them be stronger and more confident and really have that independence in, it's building a leader. It's being the family leader so you can build more leaders in your family, which is so sorely needed. I mean, we really, there's just so many challenges right now for kids. To have that confidence that they can go out into the world and kind of be that for their friends because they've learned it from you.
And it really does come back to that confidence. It really all comes back to that confidence. I was so aware, my background's in personal development and such, as a sales trainer and then into personal development. And I was so aware of how much our subconscious, right, is running the show in our lives. And so I would look at that and I think, oh, I want my kids to, believe this, to believe in the possibilities, believe that they have infinite potential and all those kinds of things that I was aware of that stuff. But at the same time, there is a fine line. You kind of have to walk things and go, okay, wait, how can I help instill that confidence other than saying, oh my gosh, you did it. Oh, great. You can do these, this thing and that thing. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you were able to read those words. That's fantastic. But what else can you do as a parent when they are young, when they're like in that 4-year-old, 5-year-old, when everything's really being so absorbed by that subconscious mind?
Yeah. Well, one is still having those conversations, giving them your full undivided time, floor time, having those conversations, or, being in there and their level of conversations. The other thing you can do at that level, when they're younger, is allow emotions to happen and don't judge them. We're always anger is such a judged emotion. Crying is so judged. You're being bad. And start allowing them to feel those emotions and being okay with it. Building in some time that, okay, this is, again, it's planning ahead. You know what? You can have these emotions. You can have the tantrum, but set up the, kind of the way it happens so that they know what to expect when they go into those moments. So you know what? You're tired, you're cranky, and you're going to have this moment. Okay, I'm going to let you have this moment for, the next 5 minutes, and then we're going to talk about it. And you don't talk about it that they're bad and they're wrong for having that tantrum, but then you get them, because when they're in the tantrum, when they're in the chaos, nothing's going to be solved. Even at those younger ages, it's like, okay, what were you feeling? What was so frustrating? What upset you about that? Why were you so upset? And it's great that you got to go through your emotions in your body. It's when they take it out on other people, that's when the discipline comes in. If they're hurting their brother or sister, or a friend, or the one issue that I had, a mom that's a 2-year-old who was hitting. And it's like, you start teaching them that is not appropriate. And that is whether it is saying, you know what, you're going to have to sit here for a few minutes and just get a hold of yourself, calm down. And then we're going to have a conversation.
Is that the appropriate discipline? Is it doing a timeout? Is it saying, okay, obviously need to just take some space here, especially if you have somebody who's becoming physical, hitting somebody, punching somebody, chasing. My son chased my daughter around with a pen and a few other things in the house. And I'd be like, oh, Lord, what do I do? But, putting him in timeout was kind of hard. That didn't really go over too well.
Yeah, it's timeout it's not really timeout. I mean, it's like when you get really frustrated and you want to walk away, it's how do you give that space? You could call it timeout, whatever it is, but how do you give them that space to say, okay, we're going to do, it's to go for a walk with them. It's something that gets them out of that energy so you can bring them back into, how do you have a conversation about what just went on? And then go, well, what do you think you could have done? How could this have been handled instead? Why was this happening? What's going on underneath again that is causing that frustration? Do they feel like they're, all the attention's going to one sibling? They're not getting anything. Again, did they have a fight with a friend or a bad day at school? So it's getting them into a space where they can get themselves, regulated, calm down, so you can have those conversations and move it forward. Because getting mad at them and punishing them and really putting, for time out, it's basically you're sending them away. It doesn't resolve the situation. It helps you push the problem out. but it really doesn't, those type of disciplines isn't corrective. It's not, what do we do next time?
Yeah, I love that you said that.
Learn.
No, because I used to always think, okay, putting you in a chair here, putting you in the corner and saying, sit in a timeout, I'd be like, in my own head, I had a hard time disciplining, because in my own head, I knew my kids could, kids can feel our energy, right? And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'd be standing there. And of course, I've got the other 3 kids looking at me, and I'm like, this is not going to work, because I think it's such a stupid thing. To me, I thought this is not doing anything. And so they all sense that. And so of course he'd get up and look at me, and then we'd just start, honestly, humor diffused everything. We would just start laughing. And I'd think, and then in my head, I'd go, oh my gosh, am I losing control here? I will tell you a little funny story though about that, because it was kind of redirecting. My dad would help me out sometimes and drive my kids to my youngest. My other 2 would be at elementary school, like, I don't know, 1st and 2nd grade or whatever. And then he would take one to preschool and the other one with him. And just so I could have a break in the morning, get ready to get to work. And my dad got pulled over by a police officer. And so he used a word he should not have used. And my son in the back seat heard it. And of course, and so that night he came home and he kept saying, and then he started, and I said, you know what? And of course, we're all trying not to laugh, because he's 4, but we're all trying not to laugh, but it's kind of funny. And so I learned a new word. So we put him in the bathroom, and I said, sweetheart, you go in there and you can say all the words you want. Get it all out of your system. And we sat outside the door, and we could hear him in there. And then he opens the door and he looks at us and he's like, and we all look at him and we go, are you done? Do you feel better? Yeah. Slams the door shut, and then he goes at it again, But it was in that moment a way to kind of let him just diffuse that energy, do his thing. But I have to tell you, Mary, we had kind of a hard time, the rest of us, not laughing about it, it was kind of like, oh, I'm supposed to be stern. I'm supposed to go, okay, this is, and at the same time, it was like, okay, we're just going to kind of like go through this and let him have his moment. I don't know. Now I look back on it and I go, okay, maybe I could have handled that differently.
Yeah. About 4 or 5 is the age you could kind of go, okay, what do we do when these moments happen so that we can move past them? Because they're going to happen. Is it, your story, it's so funny. I saw, I think it was like a TikTok video or something about this little girl that hers was to go in a room and she could do whatever she wanted to in a room. She could scream, yell, whatever it was. But when she came back out, things were calm. She could come out when she felt like she was going to be calm. And again, it's putting the onus on them of their own behavior. And you can, a 2-3-year-old, not really. They don't have the reasoning. But as they get a little bit older, you'd be surprised how many of them say, okay, this is your space to go. This is how I do it. I have these moments. I go scream into a pillow. What do you want to do so you can work out those things so we can then come back together and solve this problem together?
It's really like, in a sense, we are talking almost about how we parent our own selves too, because really that is it. I know when I have moments, I will get in the shower and I'm like, it is just screaming and I'm frustrated and da-da-da. Yeah. And then I'm in that shower for a while and then I come out and I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. But I have to do that. And I love what you're saying there, because it really is, this is no different than, okay, look at what we've learned and this is what we do. It's just taking that and allowing our children to go through those moments too, because you're right. We're all human. And they're going to have that too. But I think so much of it has been, we have to fix, we have to control. I knew a lot of it was for me too. I can look back and go, I just didn't want them to feel that pain. I didn't want them to feel like that. And, now it's like looking at it and going, it's okay. Let them go through that and process it, because they learn through that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I grew up in a house that emotion was never showed. It was never shown out. Anger was never shown outside. You always stuffed it down, and and here goes back to your point about us always having to be the teacher. This is where I learned so much from my kids, is allowing the emotion to go through, whether it be anger or upset or sadness or fear or depression. and allowing it to go through and acknowledging it. Because if you keep holding it in, or they keep holding it in, it's just going to fester and fester and fester. And why? Because we want to look good? Because we should do that? I mean, what's the reason? Start thinking, and this is such another thing. Why do you do what you do? And this is where I challenge parents a lot of the time in their thinking. Going into a really good one, which is kind of off bounds, but it's religion. Why do you do the religion the way you do it? Well, because that's the way my parents taught me. Well, that's because my grandparents were that religion. And it's learning to have these behaviors because it's what you want to do, not because you've been told to or should. And that's what we do to our kids. Well, this is the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be this way. And when you start unraveling that for yourself, you can start unraveling it for your kids.
Yes, and such an important point. You're talking about really just showing up as the example, not as the quote unquote, I guess the one that's in charge. Instead, it's I'm a living example of what's going on. I mean, I grew up when you're talking about the feelings and not showing feelings. I grew up in an alcoholic household. And so it was, if you didn't have a happy thought, you didn't have a thought. And if it wasn't positive and happy and everything was cheering, it was like, well, so we didn't know how to show emotion. And it was through a whole process of, different programs like Al-Anon and ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and understanding those coping mechanisms and understanding how to really deal with that I think helped me to then look at my children and say, oh my gosh, I don't want them to do that. I want them to be able to feel those emotions. I want them to be able to express that. But at the same time, I will say there was that other part of me that would get that, because it was kind of a foreign thing for me, so I had to go, okay, how do I really navigate this? And again, I don't think that we look early enough at how do we want to raise our children? Like we go, when someone my daughter just had my first grandchild, right? So she went through all the pregnancy, and it reminded me, we really go through that. We look at everything, we read all the books, everything about our body and what it's going to be like to deliver a baby and blah, blah, blah. But when we get into the parenting, I think it would be so beneficial if we did start saying, how, like maybe asking the questions, how do I want to raise my child? And like you just brought up, the religious aspect of it. What is our faith? What do we believe? And as a couple, do we want to change this? What do we want to do? Maybe having those conversations early on. Yeah. Do you help parents, like equip parents with here's some of the tools together? Like, do you work with them as just a couple? Do you work with them as the entire family to help them in this journey?
I have mostly worked with one-on-one with moms. Mm. They seem the ones that are the instigator of it. They bring, because a lot of the times you don't have, what when you don't have a spouse that kind of, they don't believe in that kind of work. So until they start really seeing results, and that's the way it was in my house. I was all directed by myself. And my husband's just like, yeah, whatever. And so when he started seeing the results I was having, the deeper relationships I was having with my kids, he's like, okay, there's something to this. There definitely is. Okay, I want to start learning this as well. And then he went into some coaching as well with that. But mostly it's the moms who, I'll tell them, if you really want this, you be that role model. And it doesn't matter if you're that positive role model. It doesn't matter what else is going on in the family. If you can't control, you can't change the rest of it. So let you be that. We'll work together and we'll, come up with this process so that you have that strong leadership stand for yourself. And then what I found, whether it be divorced, I've had, clients that, have messy divorces. And when that one parent shows up in that empowered way, the kids gravitate towards that. And you just want them to have at least one strong role model that they can learn from. That safe space.
Yeah, that safe space. And do you think that because that parent is showing up as that all the children, like the siblings, that it kind of just helps each one of those kids rather than like if there's one that's been having, let's say, more difficulties than another. So that tends to change that relationship because now that's softening. They're seeing you as the leader. Do you see that the other siblings, even if they haven't had some of the issues, do you see that the siblings become even closer too?
I'm trying to think of some of the situations. Yeah, they when they start, again, it's you building that relationship with each child so that they're all getting that, and then they learn a more compassionate, and they've got more confidence. What I've seen in my own family a lot of is they learn more how to handle conflict together because conflict isn't taboo. That when the family unit starts understanding that conflict is part of life, it's not that thing that we've got to sweep under the rug, or we can't talk about it until it's this massive blow up. They start understanding what it is and that it's okay that if we are in an argument, we can go to, teaching them skills, conflict skills. How do you work through conflict resolution? How do you hear the other person and not just be talking at each other? And understanding and having compassion for that other person really shifts in the entire family.
I love the conflict resolution and the idea of that because otherwise you're right. It gets to a point where you're just yelling. The voices get louder and louder. You're yelling. It's almost like, I want you to get my point. I want you to get, I'm right. And then the name calling starts and then the words start flying and all of that. And then it just blows up. And yeah. I had that a lot as a child growing up. And then, then parents aren't there. For me, it was kind of like, it's arguments are going on. So it was kind of like we had to figure it out. But I think it is so important that you bring up the conflict resolution, that kids understand that, and you can almost help them understand how to deal with that, because you're absolutely right. If they can learn how to communicate, or even like you said earlier, just walk away, just say, you know what, now's not the time. But it's almost better to say, now's not the right time. I need to walk away from this. We can talk about this later. Because if you don't, then it's almost like you're in this heated thing and the other person just walks away from you. That's like narcissistic. It's like, well, wait a minute.
Right. And again, having a plan for that. When I get this way, this is how I react. I am going to walk away for a couple minutes and I will come back. It doesn't mean anything about our relationship or our fight or anything. It means I need a moment to calm myself down. It doesn't mean I don't want to continue this. It means I've got to get myself centered again before I can go back into this. But it's, again, planning it out and saying it ahead of time that this is how I know myself and this is how I respond. And I would like the grace to be able to respond this way, and then we'll come back and work it out.
Yeah, being able to process that and give yourself that space, give each other that space, but doing it in a way that is at least allowing the other person to understand what you're doing. And I think the communication part is so absolute key, because I didn't have a lot of that growing up. It was kind of like, boom, we're out of here, and then you'd be like, what did I do wrong? Then you'd feel like it was me, it's all me. And that's where the shame comes in. Then you think you're the one that's at fault, and all that kind of, crap goes through your mind, right? Which is what we want to avoid. Do you see, I know we're wrapping up here in a moment, and I would love to have you back on another time so we could really go through this more so, because I think there's so much here that is so important to how people develop, obviously. And if we can do this early enough in the early stages, or even if it is later in life, when our kids are in their teenage years or even in their young adults, the more that we can do this, the more that we can actually develop and help them to develop healthy relationships. But I want to know if you see a big difference between raising boys and raising girls. I have two of each. And I have seen the difference. Like, my girls will come and sit on my bed and tell me everything. And my boys do now, but younger, they didn't.
Boys are definitely less talkative. what I have found is it's almost harder to get the information. I think for me, with my son, it was a little bit more difficult to get to that place where both of us could be vulnerable in the conversation. It took a lot longer than it did with my girls. And that's kind of what I've seen with a lot of my parents is that you almost have to work a little bit harder with the boys because, again, the society's image, they've got to be tough and they can't be emotional and they got to hold it all together themselves. And so it's breaking through some of those norms that can take them to a space of where, no, you can be vulnerable, you can be compassionate. With themselves, even not just with others, but being that with themselves. And so it's the same thing. It's going out, having that one-on-one time with them, and building that relationship over a long period of time. And I've seen that really work well.
Yeah, I remember I had a family relative that was over, and we were making lunch, and I something happened, and my son, 5 at the time, started crying. And she turned to him and said, "Big boys don't cry." And I was like, everything in me came out, and I was like, what do you mean? Probably not the right way to handle it, because I kind of blew up at her in that moment. I whisked him out of that chair and said, "You can cry all you want. Go in here. We can cry. Let it all out. I understand." But it was probably overkill on my part. But I was just like, it was just so, I was just like, how dare you think you can tell my child that, because I just was so keen to not wanting them to feel like those stereotypical things were, just the way that you're supposed to raise your kids. But I absolutely love this conversation. I think there's so much more that we can get into. I want to be cognizant of your time here today. So I would love to have you back again, though, at a future date and really get further into this, because I think it's just such an important topic to understanding how to really show up for our kids, show up for ourselves as well, and be really the leader that our kids not so much look up to, but that our kids respect and that they want to have a relationship with. And so not the Disneyland, fun parent, but the one that also has boundaries. Like my kids didn't like the boundaries I had, but tough.
So important. That's a whole other discussion. Yeah,
I know. And so I want to get into that in a future episode. If you're willing to come back on and do that, I would love that.
100%. Yeah. And, my mission is really to change the trajectory of parenting so that as we raise our kids with these different values, that's what they're going to carry forward into their kids, our grandkids. And then they're going to be carried forward. So it is basically that we have this generational compassion, love, and respect is being built. And that's why I do what I do. For me, it just really is exciting that we can change, the trauma that we had as kids.
Yeah, the trauma that we had. So real quick, as we wrap up, just if you can give 3 quick steps or takeaways that people know that, okay, these are 3 things I want you to pay attention to so that you can start developing those healthy relationships with your children.
One is start listening to your kids. If you can take them away, even if it's for a walk around the block, it doesn't have to be, something fancy, but have that one-on-one time where they're the ones, I love what you said, they're the ones who choose what it is, but it's something that is just time for you and that child to have that uninterrupted, not stressful time where they have your 100% attention. That is such a game changer for kids, having that. Another one is when you're doing something, really look at the mirror, like digital. If you're telling your kids to get off of their devices, what's your time like? What are you doing with, so that mirror, if you're doing it, how can you tell your kids not to do it?
Yeah, perfect. I love that.
So,
and I think, and then you had brought up the conflict resolution too, which is just the communication, that open communication and being willing to say, need a break for a minute.
Yeah. Or even, having those plans, start looking at what those conflicts that happen in your family, what are those patterns, and say, okay, how can we start planning for those?
So good. So good. Such important information. So the website is Raising Remarkable Kids. And I know that you have a free gift, which we will link to down below in the show notes, but that is the 10 parenting scripts. Is that correct?
It is 10 parenting scripts. It basically goes through what some of the hard conversations are like when your kids are on devices or they're not going to do their chores. What are those situations and how do you step through that? What kind of mindset? There's tips in there for it. There's even, there's scripts. This is how it can go. And I actually gave it to some kids, some teenagers, and said, what would this look like for you? And then I updated it based on that. So it really is based on some of the true conversations some of the parents and teens have had.
Love that. You're doing such important work. It's just, raising kids, that's everything. That really is everything. So thank you so much for being here. I will look forward to having you back on again, and we'll get into the boundaries and a few other things, especially as kids get on into, those teenage years and such and young adulthood. So thank you for being here, Mary Kay Garrett. I love this conversation. Raising Remarkable Kids is the website, and we will be back again with another episode soon.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks so much for joining me on this episode, and stay tuned for another episode of Shift or Get Off the Pot.